Continuing Mr. Orth's flipped classroom for grammar with appositives and appositive phrases. This is new content for a lot of you, so take your time. It might not be a bad idea to actually just turn off the audio and go through the video in terms of the slides themselves, taking notes. And once you get the notes taken down in writing form, then go ahead and come back, listen through the audio, and see what additional items you want to write down. And make sure you make notes, even for your teacher, of what things you want for clarification, not just on exercises in the practice. Alright, an appositive is a noun or pronoun which renames but does not replace that noun or pronoun. Typically, a pronoun actually takes the place of it, removes that from the antecedent from the sentence, whereas an appositive actually has it in there twice in some way to add information. Here's an example. If we have two simple sentences, Mr. is my English teacher and he is crazy. Rather than simply having the and in there, one way to create this as a positive and make it one sentence with only one verb is to say Mr. Orth, comma, my English teacher, comma, is crazy. The commas are on that because, in general, if something's between commas in a sentence, you can take it out. Just like if something is at the start of a sentence followed by a comma, or at the end of a sentence after a comma, oftentimes you can remove that from the sentence. It depends on whether or not your audience needs the information or not. That's where we get into the two types of appositive phrases. First is an essential appositive phrase. There's no commas here because the phrase is considered necessary for the reader. The assumption is that the vast majority of the audience won't understand unless you include the appositive phrase. Therefore, we don't skip it by putting commas around and making it somewhat optional for the reader to partake. Whereas a non-essential appositive phrase is placed between commas because it can be removed from the sentence. If in the above example, you're talking to a student or talking to another student at this school, they likely know who I am and necessarily wouldn't need explanation that I'm an English teacher. Likewise, if you're talking to a family member, a family member probably knows what classes you have, and therefore you wouldn't necessarily have to include the first sentence and can just say Mr. Orth is crazy, in which case they'll roll their eyes and say, what did he do now? Placement of phrases. First, just like all describing things, you want to place the appositive phrase as close as possible to the word it renames. Generally speaking, you want to use commas around the appositive if the comma noun or the longer phrase follows the proper noun. Oftentimes, if we have a proper noun or a simple common noun, and then we have a long phrase explaining it, we're going to put that between commas because literally it won't work for phrasing to have too many things put together. We typically don't use commas for an appositive if the proper noun follows the common noun, especially if it's a shorter phrase coming in front of that proper noun. An example, Rachel, one of my friends, called last night. Commas there indicate that one of my friends is renaming Rachel, so both the commas are absolutely necessary. If you're talking to someone who knows that you have a friend named Rachel, you may not have to say one of my friends, and so you just say Rachel called last night. That's an example of taking out the phrase between commas. So the first example is an example of a non-essential appositive. If we change the punctuation, however, Rachel, comma, one of my friends called last night, then Rachel is the noun of direct address. It's the person being told the remainder of the sentence. So you're speaking to Rachel, telling that person, Rachel, that one of your friends called last night. The second is not an example of a positive, but an example of how important those commas are. All right, when you go to the practice, make sure you're checking to see if we're looking at multiple commas or not. Check to decide if whether or not it's actually restating something or if it's just a descriptive phrase. Good hunting.